Delicate machine. Underland is like the body. Underland is the body and the blood. Underland is the body and the blood and the heart and the mind and the body getting at the mind and the body forcing the mind and the body clawing at the mind to let and to let and to let go. There is less hope. There is less drive. There is less wreck. There is less stimulation. There is less blood, but no less love for me or the body, or the hope of the body, or the hope of the mind, or the hope of time, or the hope of hope, which is all it ever was. There is no less love because the undertaking was within me. There is no less love because the undertaking was in the way the delicate machine clicks. Each click a stride, each click a soar, each click a leap, each click a teeter to greatness. But maybe what is great for one isn't great for all. What is great is the knowing. What is great is the pleasure. What is great is the pleasure knowing. What is great is the pleasure knowing you strive and you do and you did. Why greatness? It takes time for time to unravel. It takes time to trust the path. It takes time to trust the unravel and follow the thread where it leads. I am not back where I started. I am anew. I am out the other side again. I am within the eye of this life and looking. I set my eye not on the mind, click, not on the body, click. I set my eye on the outside. I set my eye outward. I set my eye on the periphery and attract. I attract and attract and attract and attract. I gravitate. I let. I trace the letting and let it be delicate. I trace the letting and let it be ragged. I trace the letting and let it purl and sheen and smooth. The machine is delicate. The eye is so delicate, a delicate machine of time. I will take care of the eye. I will take care with the eye. I will take care of all the eyes. It is all I have.
I'm Paolo Avenati, and this is my mom, Loretta. Please tell me my story.
I'd love to.
Going to start by telling you Paul's story from the beginning. Paolo, or Paul, he has two names because Paolo was born in Italy, was a regular child with no difficulties at all, had a great life and background. He was raised in Rome, he was raised in the States.
So why don't you talk a little bit about your life in Italy? What was it like growing up in Italy with an Italian father and an Italian-American mother?
Was great. The 80s, there was a lot of fun, a lot of childhood fun, a lot of parties to go around.
Yeah, I remember when Grandpa would come in
Yeah.
and you'd be having your parties.
And everything was so much fun.
Well, then I moved you to the States. What was it like living in Lexington, Massachusetts?
It was hard to adapt, to become more to understand American living words that are just American, or how are kids that way in America different from Italian, and you have to adapt and change. And also, of course, the climate is a bit harsh. But also, I did go to a good school.
When we went back to Rome again, and you went to the American Overseas School of Rome, was that the school that you liked the most?
Yes, that was a great school in Rome.
Why?
And it was to be an Italian American, an American in Italy, like a great movie.
You got to meet a lot of people from different parts of the world too, didn't you?
Yes, it made me understand more diversity, to be more, understand people from the world, people that are different, have something different.
So is that why you decided to go to university in Bremen, in Germany?
That's because I was so young, and I was 17, and I got to go to college, and they gave me half of a scholarship. So I thought, why not? Why not trust to go to a different country and understand? And also, I always thought something could be great.
How long did you stay in Bremen?
3 years.
3 years, okay. What was it like living in Bremen?
Different. Well, a lot of rain, a lot of friends that I met, a lot of...
You're still friends with a lot of them, aren't you?
Yes, it's because they all had the same emotions of to go to a great school and also to meet friends. But there was something to create, and there was something more about a union to create, to feel like you're having some fun.
I forget, what did you get your degree in Bremen?
In art and English.
And literature, okay. And then you decided that film was your direction. Well, where did you go?
Well, after staying in Boston, then I went to Prague, and then I stayed for a year.
What school did you go to? Do you remember the name? Was it PCFE?
Yes.
Yes.
That's right.
Okay.
And then I met some new friends to understand more about filming, to understand how to become like part of an editing, part of writing, part of talking, to understand how people need to be an actor and talk to an actor.
So far you're about 21 or 22 years old.
That's right.
And you've already lived in Rome, the States, Bremen, and Prague.
That's right.
And
Because I made odd choices. Well, not odd. Things that I thought I wanted and to be there.
And then you came back to Boston again, and you decided that you were going to give England a try, didn't you? So where did you move to?
In London.
You moved to London with your friend Nikki from Bremen, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And then I said, I want to just see how it can be in London. I'll be a bartender.
I remember that, yeah. And you never got paid?
That's right.
So what happened in London?
Well, that's when I felt kind of sick, and I thought, I looked online and I said, what is it for people with diabetes? And then it's sort of like,
So wait, so how old were you? You were 23?
23.
And then all of a sudden you just started not feeling very well.
That's right. And then I thought, I think it's time to go and meet and meet my mom and ask, like, something is kind of like strange.
Okay.
So he came home and went directly to the doctor, and the doctors actually agreed with him. His blood work showed that he had what was known as type 2 diabetes. But it was very odd because Paolo has always been a slim, slender build and never really abused food or anything. So he didn't quite fit the criteria for type 1 or type 2 diabetes. So we visited the specialist at Joslin Center in Boston, and the specialist there thought that maybe Paolo had more of a Modi or Leda type of diabetes. So life continued for Paolo. He did fine. He regulated it perfectly well.
And that's when everything changed. Started to change.
It started to change, yes. It's sort of like the way that I do find, and I saw the doctor, and he said, you have diabetes.
Which was a bit shocking because you didn't really meet the criteria for type 1 or type 2, did you?
No.
No.
So then we came we went to meet a specialist in Boston.
At the Joslin Diabetes Center in Boston, very famous place.
That's right. And then it was an explanation. But please tell me, what kind of, they said that I have.
Well, the specialist there thought that because you didn't meet the criteria for type 1 or type 2, that there might have been some sort of a genetic link to something more like Modi or Leda. And he did decide, however, that genetics testing was very expensive and it probably wasn't worth it to do it. So at that point, you didn't get any genetics testing. But I think he changed your medicine to injectable insulin. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that made me feel much better about, just being alive, normal, feeling well.
Yeah. And what was your energy level like, okay?
It was fine.
Yeah.
Probably normal.
Okay. All right. So that's 2006. Yeah, that's 2006, and you're 23, and you have this diabetes, but
right.
You manage it.
Yeah.
And in 2007, so you worked that summer, didn't you? You worked as a teaching assistant with special needs children.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
That was a lot of fun because it was it taught me a lesson. To understand, people have something wrong, but they're learning, and children need help.
And they're also resilient and strong. Yeah.
Very, very strong.
I remember that you actually quite loved doing that job. You did it for about 1.5 years.
That's right.
But I think you really got along well with the children and
yes,
the teachers.
They're so much fun.
Yeah. Okay, so then something great happens to you.
Well, then I was trying to see what I would go to school for.
For your graduate degree.
Your graduate degree.
Yeah.
That's right. And then for some reason I found that New York University
Yeah, well, they have the Tisch School for the Arts, and you applied for it.
That's right.
Yeah. And I know you were worried about it.
Yes, everyone was. Yes.
And then
I got in for Tisch School of Film and the art of movies and
cinema studies.
Cinema studies.
Right. Okay. So you got there and you got you headed down to New York. We packed up the car. We got you an apartment and everything, and you made some more friends.
That's right.
Yeah, and you stayed at NYU for 2 years to complete your master's degree.
That's right.
Yeah. It was a proud moment when you got your master's degree. I remember Whoopi Goldberg was the keynote speaker.
That's right. She was great.
Yeah, yeah. And then you decided to stay in New York.
Mm-hmm. And then I was looking for a lot of work to do, or I was an intern.
Well, you were looking for a career, weren't you?
Yes. It's hard to find a career.
You had a lot of jobs.
But not a career.
Not a career.
After he completed his master's degree at NYU, that's when I think things started to get a bit odd for him. He was extremely stressed. He was working many little jobs to try to make ends meet while also trying to work in his field. So he volunteered. He was given many internships, which of course didn't bring in any money.
A lot of stress, a lot of feeling like losing money and spending just on the rent.
And just being able to afford day to day.
Yeah, that's
And what
right.
happened to your health insurance?
Lost. It was totally too expensive. It was not available. I wasn't able to spend money on it.
But yet you didn't meet the criteria to get free health care.
Healthcare. That's right.
So you were caught right in the
available.
middle. You were caught right in the middle. And I think something changed with your medication again. You went back to pills instead of injectable insulin.
Insulin, that's right. And then
you started to lose weight, I think. You didn't feel very well.
Well, some friends did say that I lost some weight.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to understand that you're losing weight for no point.
Mm-hmm.
I'd not even try to lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I was trying to, I felt kind of stressed. I lost weight.
You were tired?
I was very tired, and it was kind of hard to find a new career or something to exist in a place that I would like to be in, like New York.
Like Manhattan, I know. So your mother keeps nagging you.
Mm-hmm.
You might need to come to England. Just come for a few months.
That's right.
Think about the next steps you want to take. Maybe you have more studying to do, or maybe there's something else you need to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
And so we finally convince you to come in December of 2012.
When he came to England in December of 2012, he was very thin and he looked extremely tired. We began the route of going to doctors right after Christmas to see if we could maybe improve on his medication, because unfortunately he lost his health insurance in the States and they moved him from injectable insulin just to pills, and that wasn't really working for him.
I picked you up at Manchester Airport,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I didn't even recognize you because I kept looking and you walked over to me.
You couldn't understand who I was.
I didn't recognize you. I think you had lost a lot of weight and you looked very tired.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Paul just seems to get sicker and just not well, really. He was complaining about a hearing loss. He couldn't hear very well. We thought maybe it was due to the aircraft or whatever the reason would be. So he was seen, and they thought maybe if they flushed his ear out, it might be better. Unfortunately, the flushing of that ear coincided with a major catastrophe for Paolo.
Then I really felt
sick.
very sick and very sick and very tired,
And your ear was
my ears
bothering
were
you.
bothering me,
Yeah.
and we went to go and see a doctor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the doctor said, Well, it's just because you're not adapting your diabetes well, right?
He had flu-like symptoms and wasn't feeling well to begin with. He had a temperature, just wasn't feeling right. He was a bit moody. Light wasn't good for him, and we called the doctor and they said, oh, it's probably nothing. And his ear was hurting him. So we did finally get an appointment, but they decided that, well, maybe we should have done steroids, but because he's diabetic, we won't do them and wait for a specialist appointment. We didn't actually quite make it to the specialist appointment because the next day, Paolo became very ill. He vomited and he said he felt as if he had a convulsion. We rushed him off to the emergency room where we waited, as you do, and he was seen by a doctor. And although later we found out that he was showing signs of sepsis, they decided to send him home because they couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. It wasn't an infection. It was probably a virus. There is an inquiry into that right now because Paolo should not have gone home. He came home the next day and he still wasn't well.
Because your A1Cs were good, they thought the medicine was the right one for you.
That's right.
But you were still not feeling well. And then in April, you feel really sick. You start getting that twitch in your hand for no reason.
That's right.
And then you were ill. And you said you felt as if you had a seizure or a convulsion. Yeah. And we brought you to
a convulsion, and then we went again.
We went to the emergency room, and they sent you home, even though your hand had an involuntary twitching and an involuntary hand movement.
Movement.
Yeah, your hand was just kind of doing its own thing.
And that night, that's when the big problem happened. It was about midnight and I had just gone to bed and our family dog Sam decided to sleep on the bed. At a certain point she jumped off the bed and went running into Paolo's bedroom.
Do you remember any of that?
No. You're the only person that can understand that memory issue.
I remember that the dog Sam jumped off the bed. We ran into your bedroom and
jumped on the bed, the little dog.
Yeah.
And then it was just like a great friend.
Yeah.
And found us.
Yeah.
She came back, she was definitely upset, and I went running to see what was wrong, and Paolo was having a seizure. I have no experience with seizures at all, and I totally panicked. I screamed for help.
And then the ambulance came, you got taken to hospital. I don't think you remember any of that at all.
No one would.
Nothing.
No one would.
And the next thing you know, you're in the ICU 3 days.
About 10 minutes into his stay there, a doctor came out and said, we're going to have to intubate him. Something is going on. And we can't do an MRI scan tonight because of the seizure. We can do a CAT scan, and we'll be back to you in a few minutes. And about 20 minutes later, he came in and sat us down, and his words were, we don't really know what is happening with Paolo. All we can tell you is that he is very, very poorly right now. We see something, there's a little gray zone coming up in his brain, and on the right hand side, and that could be several things. It could be an infection, it could be a virus, it could be a brain tumor, it could be related to HIV, so we're going to have to do all kinds of tests. They took him up to the intensive care unit and began working on him. He was sedated, he was intubated, and they did a spinal tap to remove fluid to see what type of infection it was, and began treating him for both a viral infection and a bacterial infection, because that's what you do in these cases.
The first time you came in, you had, what I remembered were episodes where you started fitting at home. So if I remember well, your mum said you started fitting in one arm, and then it turned to progressively into generalized seizures. And when you came to hospital, you were paraxial, so you had the temperature, and therefore we thought you had an infection, because infections of the brain cause people to have seizures. At the time you were quite unwell, so you were very drowsy, and they had to intubate you and put you on ventilation. Strange thing, actually the interesting thing about your scan was that it was very suggestive of the fact that you had what we thought was herpes simplex encephalitis. So it's a viral infection of the brain that is very uncommon but is potentially fatal. So we had to treat you as if you had this viral infection of your brain, because if we didn't, you could potentially get really unwell and even die. And when we gave you antiviral treatment, you seemed to respond very quickly, so you were intubated the next day, and after 2 weeks in hospital, you were pretty back to your normal self. And I remember, apart from some hearing loss, you were doing very well, so we decided that you had viral encephalitis, and we let you go home. But the other interesting thing about your case was that we never isolated the virus. So when we tested the fluid around your brain, it was clear. There was no sign of infection. But sometimes this happens. Actually, in 5% of cases of this form of encephalitis, the fluid around the brain might not show any infection. So we thought, given the fact that you presented with fever and you had seizures and your scan suggested this infection, we thought there were pretty good chances that this was a viral encephalitis. And you did very well on the antivirals, and we decided to let you go home.
He spent 2 weeks in the hospital at that time. By the end of his stay there, he was pretty much he was weak, but pretty much back to himself, chatting normally, very thin, and just ready to go home.
2 weeks that I stayed in the hospital, and then they said, "You're fine, you can go home." And so I was walking around.
But they didn't change the diabetes medicine.
No, they couldn't understand that someone was losing weight or, so...
But we did get
weak.
you to the specialist, didn't we?
Right.
Yeah. So, and then you did the blood test for the MODY and the genetics test for MODY, which came out negative.
Right.
Yeah.
So they did some blood tests, but they couldn't find anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we took him home and monitored him and watched him, and everything seemed to be okay with him. He grew a bit stronger, although he didn't gain any weight. I did see an endocrinologist at that time who began the genetics testing for MODY. We got the response back that it wasn't MODY, or at least the 2 forms of MODY that they tested for, because I believe there are 9 types of MODY. Anyway, we continue with the medication that was prescribed and, trying to do everything right, balanced, healthy diet, etc. And Paolo feels better, and because the climate in England is so terrible, we live in the north of England, Paolo decided that he would go with a friend to Portugal.
And it was beautiful, and everything was fine. I felt totally okay. Mm-hmm. And then, just great food and walking around, seeing some art, and then seeing a different world, that it was a lot of sun.
I know you loved it.
Because it was about feeling better.
Mm-hmm. At the end of September, Paolo decided to go visit his father in Italy.
And so I go and see my father.
Mm-hmm.
And
it was the end of September.
At the end of September. So that year in 2013, I thought I was fine. And then I felt kind of like I was slowly losing my words.
He was there about 6 days when I got a phone call. Mom, I don't really know what's going on, but I can't really find my words. I, of course, as all mothers do, freak out. Okay, you need to get on the plane, you need to come home, we need to get you to the doctor. No, Mom, because Paolo is very laid back. I'm sure this is totally fine. It'll be okay.
And I looked through a book, and I thought, why can't I read as much as I used to? And how can I read or write?
And you couldn't really hear them? Your hearing was a bit affected?
Yes, it was.
So here he is with not quite perfect hearing, not being able to communicate properly. Paolo is bilingual, so he's able to speak English and Italian. Not being able to read properly and write. And he's about ready to come home now with me pushing. But getting through an airport where you have to read, you have to be quick, you have to know your way to security, you have to be able to hear announcements, read schedule board. Anyway, Paolo's biggest achievement to today, he feels, is that he managed to get his way through security without too much damage.
You got off the plane and I brought you to the hospital.
That's right. After one day.
And because I broke the rules and didn't respect the way things were done at the NHS, the doctor got upset with us.
I went into the hospital to find the neurologist just to say, what should I do with this? And he wasn't very happy with my American way of dealing with things because there's a system here. And I did see him. He did treat me not very nicely, and told me that probably it was nothing. He could wait for an appointment and he would squeeze him in the earliest as he possibly could, which was the following week. I wasn't very happy with that. I watched Paolo struggle to get his words. He also started having difficulty with light again. So the next morning I tricked him and said, look, we're just going to get dressed and go to the hospital. It'll be fine.
Well, I couldn't talk, and so you were very stubborn. Therefore, we go to the A&E, and I have to stand throughout the system, and they checked me up all over and over, but I couldn't actually...
They couldn't find anything.
They couldn't find anything wrong, and then, but they saw that a person was losing words, and a little bit like couldn't hear, and then a person that was only like could understand someone so loud like my mom.
And so they said, you wanted to go home, and they said, sorry, you can't. We have to keep you here.
Right. So I had to stay there, and then waited.
You had to do another brain scan.
I had to do blood test.
Spinal tap again.
Spinal tap. Oh my
brain
God.
scan.
Brain scan and MRI.
Yeah, CAT scan, PET scan.
That's right, to find what is wrong.
They began the treatment as they had the last time for a viral issue. Paolo then stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks. During that time, the neurologist, a younger, kinder one, worked very hard to find out what was going on. He thought that possibly this encephalitis could be autoimmune in nature. And there are different types of autoimmune encephalitis. They changed the treatment from acyclovir to an infusion, which I'm not quite sure what was in the infusion, and a steroid treatment.
At this point we were surprised because the inflammation that you had on one side of the brain initially now moved to the other side of the brain. And therefore we started thinking about autoimmune encephalitis. Your own immune system rather starts attacking different parts of your body, and in this case it's the brain. Again, we did analyze the fluid around your brain and we didn't find any infection. So we thought autoimmune encephalitis was possible. And therefore we gave you steroids and see what would happen. But looking back at your case, there were some pointers that this could be something else. And I remember talking to you and your mum said you've always been not so good at sports, you always used to get tired very quickly, and the fact that you had diabetes very early on and we couldn't find a cause for this.
April of 2014.
That's when Dr. Garaya thought, let's do a genetics test.
Let's do a genetic test. So he did a genetic test.
Yeah.
A deviant mutation
Yeah.
is what happened to me.
Yeah.
And it changed what happened to me in my life.
Your whole life changed.
My whole life changed.
And that's when the second part of the drama began.
Now, I'm working on relearning my English, which I'm.
You're much better now.
My
Yeah.
voice is back.
You
Sort of.
lost everything. You couldn't unlock your computer. You
Unlock.
couldn't read letters. You couldn't, nothing.
Right.
Paolo comes home and realizes that he's unable to use his laptop at all because he can't remember his password. Letters and numbers mean nothing to him. He can't get into his email. He can't get into any of his online banking, student loan accounts, communication with the world, social media, nothing. And it's really, really hard because he hadn't written anything down, so no one could help him remember these passwords. 4 weeks after he was able to unlock his laptop.
So then I needed a help. I needed a friend that came over and opened all my passwords and codes. And he was a great friend.
Unless you've been through this, you cannot understand how difficult it is to pay a bill, talk to a person. I tried to help Paolo. I wanted to pay his bills. The bank wouldn't have it because he couldn't remember his name and his birthday, so he couldn't authorize me to speak. The thing that kept us going was that Paolo seemed to be improving.
Why do you think people that know me think that I disappeared? It's because I lost a lot of words, a lot of things.
You couldn't write properly.
I couldn't write properly in my emails.
Read.
I couldn't read properly, and I couldn't talk. And I had to teach myself some words. How do you say that words to that I can ask for? And that's what I have to work for. And also, I know that I went to a lot of news to teach myself how to read English and to learn about genetics, to learn about disorders.
A little bit at a time, the words start coming back. Jon Stewart and The Daily Show and The Colbert Report become his best friends, shows that he always loved, but really, really loved even more during that time. He's getting the news in now. He's able to say more things.
You were born in Italy. Your first language was Italian.
That's right. So
do you know how to speak Italian anymore, or do you feel like that's gone?
Part of it. But that's because I went to schools in English, and then I knew Italian. Then some wiped out. The English came back, and then the Italian is coming back on its own. And then I read books in Italian to teach myself how to do it. Even if I have a master's degree or I went to a lot of schools or anything like that, everything has been wiped out, sort of. Part of it. And then now I have to reteach myself part of it.
The young neurologist who had taken a great interest in Paolo and his situation didn't didn't really give up. He wanted Paolo to keep repeating different sorts of blood work. So all of the blood work for autoimmune encephalitis came back negative. But he was still concerned because the MRI scan, although it was fine and things had cleared, he saw what he thought was a tiny scar.
Then I thought about MELAS, so it's mitochondrial encephalopathy with lactic acidosis and stroke-like episodes. So this is a very rare condition where people tend to present early in the 20s, 30s, some actually present in the 40s and 50s as well. And they all seem to have a prominent brain damage initially, so inflammation of the brain. And one of the things that we find is that a lot of them have problems with their endocrine system, so things like their pancreas or the adrenal glands, and in your case you had diabetes, which, as you know, is a problem with your pancreas. So that made us think that you probably had this condition called MELAS. It's a very rare condition. Therefore we sent you for this blood test, and it actually came back to show that you had MELAS.
So he asked if Paolo could have a genetics test just to see if there was something genetic going on and to rule that out. Paolo has this genetics test in April 2014, so a year to the day when the situation really mushroomed. 6 weeks later, we get a call from the neurologist that we need to go in and see him because Paolo has tested positive for a mitochondrial disorder called MELAS.
MELAS is a very rare condition, and it affects only a few hundreds to maybe around 1,000 people in the UK. And as I mentioned before, you present with stroke-like episodes. So the second time when you presented, you had speech disturbance, so you couldn't form your words clearly. And people with strokes do have problems with their speech very often. So the other thing about MELAS is that a lot of these people present with headaches initially. Some of them are quite short, and some of these people also have hearing problems. And in your case, you did have hearing problems from the start. So what we did then was send a blood sample to Newcastle, where they test for this abnormality. So it's a problem with the mitochondria. The mitochondrion is the powerhouse of your cell, so it is that part of the cell that supplies energy. And the reason why MELAS tends to affect the brain most is because your brain uses a lot of energy, and also your muscles, so that's why people with MELAS also have exercise intolerance. So at this point, when your results came back and suggested you had MELAS, I decided to send you to see one of the other professors in Newcastle who specialize in MELAS. A lot of doctors aren't aware of MELAS because it's such a rare condition, and what we decided is to write a case report about you, not only because you had MELAS, but because your presentation was very unusual for MELAS. There's only been 5 cases in the world, in the literature, where MELAS has mimicked the radiological and clinical features of herpes simplex encephalitis. So that's what made your case very unique in a way.
Today is Thursday, September 11th, 2014. On Monday, Paolo had his visit at the Newcastle Medical Center with the mitochondrial disease team. During that time, both of us underwent various tests and examinations. We had blood work, we had a neurological exam. Paul had to do some memory tests and an electrocardiogram. There are 1,100 cases of mitochondrial disease in the UK and about 200 types of mitochondrial disorders. Paolo will be part of a study. The doctors want to gain more knowledge and be able to give patients more facts. What they know right now is that it is very individualized and each person has a different outcome. Dr. Gorman was delighted with the fact that Paolo has decided to make a documentary about mitochondrial disease, as the level of awareness needs to be raised. Not many people know it exists, and it's often misdiagnosed or just ignored, really, until something major happens. Today is July 10th, 2022. It's been 9 years since the discovery of Paolo's illness, MELAS, and I thought I would just give an update as to how he is currently doing. In 2014 is when the formal diagnosis came through, although he began showing symptoms towards the end of 2012. In 2015, I decided that Paolo and I should visit New York. Aside from the fact that I'm from New York and I was homesick, I also did not want to leave any stones unturned with regards to possibilities for different treatments, even alternative therapies, as different countries approach illness in a different way. I thought we needed to try it. So Paolo and I lived in New York from 2015 till 2019. In 2018, Paolo experienced a pretty significant stroke-like event that set him back for a couple of months, particularly with mobility and balance. And so I became increasingly concerned that he couldn't be on his own. And as he was rejecting having any help, and it was just he and I in the States, and I had no family support at the time, I had to just make the decision to return to the UK, where my husband and daughter were also waiting for us, essentially. So I took an early retirement, and Paolo and I returned in 2019. Literally 6 months into our stay here, we began the journey with COVID. None of us, fortunately, had COVID. We have been spending all of these years essentially shielding, being extremely careful, and which is a good thing, because over the years, over these past 3 years, Paolo has deteriorated significantly, especially with his cognitive functioning, cognitive abilities. Communication is very difficult. His hearing has worsened. He has suffered small other stroke-like events. I was told that he literally has ongoing silent seizure and stroke-like events occurring all the time. So he needs to be carefully watched. He forgets things. He's a diabetic, and so he's always done his own insulin, but one day he just woke up and he forgot how to do it. He forgot what cherries are and how to eat them. So every day is a whole new journey. It's incredibly sad, incredibly difficult for him, incredibly difficult for me to watch. He has been seen consistently either in person or via video conference at Newcastle with Professor Gorman and his team. And really he needs 24/7 care now, not so much because he can't take care of his daily routine, but because mentally he's not able to deal with all the regular things in life. And I think the thing that I want to say is that the COVID combined with the illness has been so debilitating on a mental and emotional level. The solitude and the isolation has been really dramatic for him. You know, these kinds of illnesses, you do lose your contacts with your friends, because you can't really keep up with what they're doing, and friends move on, they have a life, and he's been so lonely. I've actually been his lifeline over these past 3 years. Yes, so now I just, pray every day that he stays as well as he can be, and we just all do our best to make sure that he has his best life.
How has your life changed now? Do you feel like you're the Paul that you used to be?
I learned a lesson. I learned a lesson to understand people that have a problem, a genetic problem, disorders, diseases, and also the point that you have to work to feel who you are better. Anything, any problem, any mistake, anything that comes in towards your body, you work hard. Mm-hmm. And also, I do feel better.
Mm-hmm. So physically you feel better?
Physically, I feel better. Mm-hmm. I work hardly.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking forward to see my life. And work so to find a career, to understand, for people to help.
So you feel like now you want to be a bit of an ambassador, or someone that spreads the word about mitochondrial disorders.
An ambassador, yes.
Yeah, you want to tell, you want the world to know about what we learned.
Yes, of course, someone that I would like to help, and mm-hmm. someone that I want to give information regarding mitochondrial disorders, mm-hmm. or what happened to me, which is called MELAS mm-hmm. disorder.
So where do you think you're going with all this now? What are you going to do with your life now that you've had this life-changing event?
I know that there is a way to work mm-hmm. For your own body, mm-hmm. Anything that can make you help, and to meet people mm-hmm. that I know, mm-hmm. people that I want to see mm-hmm. and talk to, mm-hmm. and I want to see the world. Mm. I want to go throughout the world and explain. I have to go throughout an entire way of thinking how to work.
You've had to change a whole way of thinking, and you know who you are, so, okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So now what I need is more to see parts of people and the world mm-hmm. to feel alive. Mm-hmm. I need to feel alive, mm-hmm. not just go to, I will go to the doctors, I will go to all the people that ask me to go, neurologists, a doctor in Newcastle, all throughout England. It doesn't matter, but the point is, people need to tell you have some manners regarding life. Like, people need to go and have something enjoyable and something fun.
To look forward to. Make you not only about the illness. You don't want to just focus on it.
Don't focus the illness. Mm. You focus on what you're great at. Mm. Something that you're good at, and something that you love. Mm. Like, I love art. I love movies. I love to paint. I love to go throughout the world and meet people and great foods. Mm. Okay? So that's exactly like how exactly a person that changed learned a lesson. Mm. And like Stephen Hawking, there is hope.
There is. There is hope. You just have to always stay positive and optimistic.
That's right, optimistic.
Good.
Say it again.
Optimistic.
Optimistic.
Yay!
Yes. Right. Who isn't optimistic? That you have to work for.
Yeah, that's hard.
Well, one day is hard, and one day is better.
Okay. One day at a time.
Sure. Baby step.
Baby steps. Yeah, but you've come a long way since you were ill the last time. So.
Well, I hope that this works.
Good.
Yeah, I think, that diagnostic odyssey is something that many patients describe. And I think there's probably two aspects of it. Perhaps the biggest thing is around awareness of mitochondrial disease. It mimics so many other conditions. And I think, what we hope to do today, and what I just hugely admire both Loretta and Paolo with this production, is to raise its awareness. So I think the first thing is around awareness, and then the second thing is, when you say to someone you've got mitochondrial disease, it's just about awareness, it's an understanding of what it really is. If you don't think about it, you never diagnose it. So what are the salient things we need everybody to think about? That first point of contact with your GP, you come into A&E, even be the nurse in the clinic. What must they think? Why would you think mitochondrial disease? Well, what I would suggest to them is, firstly, is if there's more than one organ involved, so things like cardiomyopathy, deafness and diabetes together, there is a pattern to this. Early onset dementia, really severe intractable seizures. Or as I would say, if it almost, or even profound blindness that comes out from nowhere, think about mitochondrial disease. And really, as I always say, as I'm imparting to students and to anyone that I'm trying to educate about mitochondrial diseases, if it just doesn't fit right or just doesn't look right, think mitochondrial disease, and don't be afraid to reach out to the experts wherever you are around the globe and ask, could this be it? It's no problem if it's not. Yeah, I think that's a really good question because, what we describe in mitochondrial, or in the mitochondrial field, clinicians will call this thing called MELAS. And really what it is really a descriptor of a syndrome, and really what patients present with look like strokes. So for all intents and purposes, these are usually young people. They look like they have a stroke on the scan, but the scan doesn't fit. So we look at it and go, that just doesn't fit what we classically see. So we teach people about, eloquent areas in scans, areas that there's a pattern to what you might see in a stroke. First, that's the clue. It doesn't fit. Quite often mimics something else. And I always say, what if you could be a young person who comes in with a stroke? Actually, it should already be on the differential list. So along with all those other mimicking things, we have vasculitis, dissection, encephalitis. Think about mitochondrial disease, because that's what's fairly typical. And the other thing I would say as well, what we need to impart is that it's seizure generated. Actually, they are not strokes. When you look at a scan and you think it's a stroke, it's not. It's actually seizures what you're seeing, because the downstream effect of recurrent seizures, and they may be quite subtle. So quite often, people like Paolo who have this one mitochondrial disease are missed. They're missed for quite a considerable period of time, because they may first present with visual hallucinations, but they don't come in and tell you that. They see, little coloured strobes or lights, or they see almost flashing lights or colour balls, or they see almost like hallucinations. People don't volunteer that originally.
So it's about how you interrogate and how you
absolutely.
ask.
And as the seizures spread, then you get more obvious things. So if you have a full-blown seizure, that's usually further down the line. Not always, it can be the presenting feature, but if you actually ask back, you can actually often get these features of seizures. And sometimes they're mixed up with simple things like migraine, but they're beyond that. And then you should also look holistically. It often goes with deafness. They may have then diabetes. It often comes with small stature and gut problems with their guts, severe constipation, or they start to lose a significant amount of weight, or never gained weight right from the start. So there are clues to make you think about it, the form that he has. And sadly, it's a form of mitochondrial condition that we don't have any effective therapies, nor curative therapies for it. But recognizing early, instigating anti-seizure medications early definitely slows the propagation of this condition. It's very much a holistic approach. So
Right.
if I'm part anything, it's a multidisciplinary approach. Because hopefully someone subtly say, yes, it's important to get anti-seizure medications in there early. Sometimes there's a delay, as you say, in diagnosis, but actually it's not just the anti-seizure medication. You know, if the gut isn't working properly, you have to think about how you would give anti-seizure medication. So conventionally we give it as a tablet, but quite often that's just not appropriate because the gut doesn't work, so the medications don't get properly absorbed into the bloodstream. So you need to think about giving them other ways. The gut doesn't work, you need to make sure you try and help with medications to make things move within the gut. You need to think about nutrition. You need to think about control of diabetes. It can just present during an episode or before or after. And you know, there are even fundamental things. If you've had a seizure and you've recurrent what looks like stroke-like episodes, this condition actually sets on early onset dementia. So we see people in their 30s and 40s starting to dement. And actually what you need to think about that. So if you also have a real severe hearing loss, is the hearing loss causing the problem when you're trying to communicate, or is it the downstream effect of these recurrent seizures? So there are a lot of things we can do which are really supportive, and we need to think about it. So I'm always saying holistic approach, multidisciplinary, regular screening, make sure you check for acute or insidious onset of diabetes. Cardiac screening, really important because they are increased risk of cardiomyopathy. ECG, because they sometimes can have a rhythm problem. Again, it's just thinking about it and looking for it. I think that's paramount. And I always say there's a dual approach to what we do here, not just us here in Newcastle, but really throughout the mitochondrial community. I genuinely believe we will find something. I absolutely feel there's hope. You know, I look at the, you know, how Resolute and how Loretta and Paolo have overcome great adversity with the condition because they're living this every day, and I look at them and I go, they can do it, we can do it, and the partnership we have with our patients, I clearly believe we will find something and we'll find a cure, but at the same time, it's also about quality of life as we quest, and our quest as scientists and clinicians as we look for that. At the same time, we must always be cognizant about what we can do. And it isn't just about the medications, what we can do. It's about, you know, helping people come to terms with the condition, try and educate others about what it is, and also to bring the international community on board together, because if there's anything we've learned over the last couple of years, we're stronger together. Get there quicker together, and I genuinely believe if we all join forces internationally, we'll get there quicker. So if there's any message that I come from today is absolutely positive, working together, patient communities, the industries, as well as the scientists working together, we will provide hope, and we'll also find a cure.
Hey Paul, how you doing? Say something. Say hello. Just say hello. Okay.
Capita che pochi uomini fanno il destino dell'umanità. Gli altri sono troppo soli nella loro smisurata quantità. Depistati, allontanati, disabituati alla verità, mentre gli si porta via futuro. Capita che per difendersi qualcuno inventi una filosofia, e così la voglia di reagire si suicida dentro una bugia. Stronza, maledetta complice, mascheratrice di vigliaccheria. Sveglia gente, e ora io non ce la faccio più a restare fermo qui con la rabbia che mi morde le mani. Dimmi che nemmeno tu puoi più vivere così, perché cambiare ancora si può. Voglio aprire la finestra e guardare che ci sia il sole. Domani anche quando tutto sta crollando non ti devi rassegnare mai. Sì, perché se smetti di sognare in fondo già sei morto e non lo sai. Se non vuoi morire guarda avanti come faccio io che cerco ancora il mio domani. Perché cambiare ancora si può. Voglio aprire la finestra e guardare che ci sia il sole.